Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 9th biennial Winter Wildlands Alliance Grassroots Advocacy Conference. Biennial is one of those obscure Latin words that means every 2 years. So 2 years ago, we were in downtown Boise in a conference room. 2 years before that, we were huddled in a Sierra Club lodge from the 1920s up on Donner Summit, which was really fun. We were all kind of camped out there. 2 years before that, we were at the American Alpine Club in Golden. Before that, it's before my time, so I don't remember. But this is an interesting version. It's obviously got pros and cons doing this live. The pro, of course, is that hopefully more people can attend. I think we had 150 people RSVP'd, so it should be a pretty robust audience. The con, of course, is that I'm not looking out at a sea of faces that I recognize and love, and we're not mingling over the buffet between sessions. But anyway, hopefully we'll have a good conversation. It's going to go really quickly, so I'm going to jump right in. A couple of different things. So I'm David Page. I'm the Advocacy Director for Winter Wildlands Alliance. I'm based in Mammoth Lakes, which is known as Payahunadu, the current and traditional lands of the Paiute and Shoshone peoples. We are a national nonprofit organization based in Boise, although our policy director works in Bozeman and I work in California, so we're kind of spread out, and we were already virtual before it was a cool thing to be. We are an alliance of 32 different grassroots groups all across the country, and we work this is a new tagline that I've been working on. It's that we work to educate, inspire, and empower people to take care of public lands and wild winter landscapes. So we work with our grassroots groups. We also have 70 snow school sites across the country where we get about 34,000 students out on snow, mostly underprivileged students or underserved students. We have, in a normal year, about 100 plus cities and towns where we show the Backcountry Film Festival every year. Last year and this year, there will continue to be kind of a hybrid version where people will have a chance to watch the Backcountry Film Festival online. But it looks like, at least in some locations, we may be able to have live outdoor Backcountry Film Festivals this year, which is great to be able to bring the community together. A little bit of housekeeping. Let's see, the theme of the conference is, can we save the backcountry from ourselves? We've got some really exciting panels, so hopefully you'll be joining us throughout the next couple of days. If you need to check the schedule, it's online, winterwildlands.org/conference. We're going to be talking about how to improve funding for our land management agencies. We'll be talking about winter travel planning, of course, as we do every year. We'll be talking about snow rangers and trail hosts and ski area expansions and the role of athlete influencers and social media. All of it will be recorded and available afterwards on the website. So to jump in, I just want to do a quick land acknowledgement. Rather than a specific land acknowledgement about a region, I just want to talk about, we're talking about public lands here throughout this conference. And, I think it's incumbent on us to recognize the history of public lands is a generally tragic and violent one. People have been living in these landscapes and depending on these landscapes and ecosystems for thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands of years. And in our history, a lot of people have been removed from these lands at gunpoint or just killed outright. And not to dwell on the horrors and the tragedy of the past, but I think this reiterates the deep importance and responsibility that we have in a democracy to manage these public lands in a responsible way, to create access for all people, and to responsibly steward the landscapes and ecosystems for the generations that follow us. So without further ado, I would like to, so the title of our panel is Curbing Our Enthusiasm. Basically dealing with increased recreation on public lands. There's been, as we all, I think, have probably felt in our own corners, just a lot of people out on the landscape, which on the one hand is a great thing because we need more and more advocates for these public lands in a democracy so that we can protect them. And of course, the benefits are myriad, right? It's good for our health and our well-being. On the flip side, however, there are impacts to our communities with more and more visitors. There are impacts to the landscape. It's a long list of potential impacts. And so what we want to talk about today is how do we instill, an ethic of responsibility. So without further ado, let me pass the baton a little bit and have each of our panelists introduce his or herself. And then we'll jump into some discussion for about 30 minutes. And then we'll allow time, about 15 minutes at the end, for some Q&A from the audience. So as you're listening and thinking about things, please feel free to put a question into the chat. And Melinda, our events director, will pop on at the end and feed us some good questions for some open discussion at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to you, Corey, to introduce yourself, and we'll get going.
Sounds good, David. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Like David said, I'm Corey Lewellen. I'm the district ranger for the Bozeman Ranger District with the Custer Gallatin National Forest here in Bozeman, Montana. I represent and work with the United States Forest Service, and we are responsible for managing national forest lands here in the United States. The good fortune of managing public lands, which is a pretty exciting opportunity. And thank you, David, for this opportunity, and very excited to join you guys this morning.
Thanks, Corey. Danica.
Hi, I'm Danica Carey. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Director of Marketing Operations for Serius Innovation. We are a winter accessories company based out of San Diego, California, which is the native lands of the Kumeyaay people.
Thank you. Dana?
Hi there, I'm Dana Watts. I am the Executive Director at the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics, she, her. I'm coming to you from Boulder, and as a Colorado native, I do want to acknowledge this land is within in the territories of the Ute, Cheyenne, Arapaho people. And it also, 48 contemporary nations are historically tied to the lands in the state of Colorado. I've been with Leave No Trace. I've been the executive director for 25 years. And Leave No Trace is an organization, it's a program, and it's a movement that uses power of science, education, training, and people to ensure sustainable future for the outdoors and for the planet. I know that's a bit of a mouthful, and we'll get into more detail, but in its simplest form, Leave No Trace is a critical, meaningful way for people to protect the outdoors based on 7 principles. And as we know, we'll talk about more and more people getting outside today, more and more people seeking outdoor experiences. We know that 9 out of 10 people don't have the information and the skills that they need to protect these places. And that's what Leave No Trace is all about. We really believe in the power of knowledge and education.
Great. Thanks, Dana. Haley.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, David. Thank you, Winter Wildlands. I'm really excited for this conference. And thanks for everybody in the audience for your advocacy. My name's Haley Caruso. I work for REI here in Northern California. I'm the local brand engagement and impact manager, which means I get to work with community, nonprofit partners, events, and local marketing here in Northern California. I personally am located in Oakland, which is the territory of Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. I'm also the co-lead of the Recreate Responsibly California Coalition, and the reason I think why I was invited to join this panel today on curbing our enthusiasm. So really excited to share with you about Recreate Responsibly and everything that we're working on. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here, Haley. So, Corey, I'm going to start it off with you. As I said, and as I think, we've all experienced, and as Dana mentioned, we've seen, you see different numbers, but I think in certain units of the Forest Service and certainly in the Park Service, we've seen increased visitation to the tune of 200, 300% over the last 18 months, 2 years. At the same time, the agencies like yours, the Forest Service is, as I think most of us know, chronically underfunded. I've heard sort of anecdotally from forest supervisors that they're operating at, less than 20% of the budget that they really need to do the management that they're, that the mission requires. So we're kind of at a crossroads here of how do we deal with outdoor recreation in a way that's sustainable? And I guess just to start off, if you could give us kind of your local perspective as a district ranger, what have you felt in terms of visitation impacts, and what have been your struggles, and what hopes and what partnerships have you had to help you out?
Yeah, good stuff, David. So a few things come to mind. First of all, just to kind of set the stage a little bit about what you just said, that increase in growth and recreation, and certainly here in Gallatin Valley in the Bozeman community, we are no exception. We've had what I consider exponential growth. We are a heavily recreated community. The 2020 census just came out last week, actually, and the city of Bozeman in 2010 was about 37,000, and now it's about 53,000. And we see that steady growth every single year, and of course it's relative. I think of Dana there in Boulder and just the White River National Forest or some of those forests in Region 5, but certainly here in Montana and in Bozeman, we have definitely experienced rapid growth and recreational increases on the landscape. We are really fortunate. I mean, it's an amazing place to live and work. We are certainly a 4-season recreational use from all aspects that you can think of, and so it's great. I mean, it's great. We just as you said earlier. I mean, we want that inclusiveness and that access to national forest lands and that use and the mental and physical health and all the benefits of being out in the landscape. But there are certainly trade-offs with that increase in growth. And so a couple thoughts from kind of the impact perspective, from the day-to-day grind of it, if you will, with the increase in growth, without doubt, we see a lot of overcrowding, trailheads that are overcrowded and infrastructure that is being overused, if you will, vehicles parked along the highways. There's safety issues. I mean, certainly a safety is top of our mind a lot when folks are out enjoying public lands. Part of that increase in growth, though, you're seeing maybe some encroachment or trespass issues, seeing, vehicles go where maybe we don't want them to go from an impacts to natural resources. Obviously, a steady increase in just the management of that, the pumping toilets and cleaning garbage cans. And I've had the good fortune of cleaning some garbage cans in myself. And, people love taking their dogs out in the national forest, which is great, but that's just not as enjoyable to empty those type of garbage cans. But certainly a lot of that growth, a lot of that kind of concerns and just trade-offs and impacts kind of on that day-to-day perspective. But then really kind of on a bigger scale of it really comes down to that carrying capacity, which is certainly, I think, a lot of this conversation. And I look at that carrying capacity from a couple different perspectives. One locally, I mean, as an agency, and our ability to help manage that growth is certainly limited. And then also that carrying capacity of our infrastructure, our roads and our trails and our campgrounds, our infrastructure is not at the scale to keep up with that type of growth. But then even at a bigger perspective, I'm really trying to wrap our head around the carrying capacity of our landscape and of our environmental, the ecology that we get to manage, the wildlife habitat, and just the different type of landscape and habitat we have in the Bozeman Ranger District. And that's, I think, one of the biggest questions we really have as we're trying to wrap our head around how are we going to continue to manage the growth from a carrying capacity perspective, as in staff, as in infrastructure, but then also that balance with the resource aspect of it. And that definitely leads me to our partners. I'm probably biased, but I will say we've got some of the best partners here in the state of Montana and here locally in Bozeman, and really diverse partnership groups from across all different spectrums. And without doubt, they are absolutely essential to the management of public lands, and especially for us here at the Bozeman Ranger District, and have really helped us gain some capacity Although there's no free lunch, the more partnerships and the more opportunities for that, there's that grants and agreements and that management aspect of it. But we're able to get a lot of work done and a lot of that communication, that community outreach and engagement because of our local partners. And, I could give a lot of examples, and we've got tons of partners who are just doing great volunteer work. I mean, we average a little over 10,000 hours a year doing volunteer work just on the Bozeman Ranger District. And that's from cleaning trails and helping clean up campgrounds, or doing garbage cleans up in some of our popular watersheds up there in Highlight, to a lot of advocacy and a lot of outreach and communication and just, the whole leave no trace ethic and trying to educate our community. We are really, growing community, as well as, we have the university here, of course, so we get a lot of new users every year. So there's always kind of a need to push the same information and the new information almost every year. And I would share one thing that we're doing. We actually just started kind of a planning effort with a lot of our key partners throughout the community, as well as local government, county government, to look exactly at this conversation about capacity. And we're focusing on one piece of our district, the Bridger Mountains, and we're talking specifically about capacity. Where could we maybe have some more growth, or where do we not want more growth? Like, here's a piece of landscape that we really need to be kind of keeping it as is. We're also fortunate, we're updating, and we're very close to finishing a new forest plan for our national forest. And that forest plan really looked at a variety of incredibly important information, especially as it relates to wildlife connectivity and wildlife habitat. And there are going to be places on the landscape where we're probably not going to see a lot more growth. We're going to have to try to manage what we've got, but maybe there's other opportunities where we can have more effective, more efficient use, and encourage some different uses in one part of the landscape. So that effort's ongoing. We just started it this year, and really see the end product of that as kind of that collaborative, inclusive approach of how we want to manage some of the natural resources throughout this district. So anyway, that's just a few pieces. The partnership aspect is, I just can't say enough. It's absolutely vital to the success of managing public lands, and certainly, again, value this conversation.
Great. Thank you so much for all that, Corey. So yeah, with regard to partnership and outreach and advocacy, I'm going to shift over to Dana. Obviously, there's the agency perspective on this. The other perspective is, ultimately the responsibility for the stewardship of these lands falls on each of us individually. And so, how do we inspire an ethic that works on the land in order to ease the job of the land managers and take care of the places that we love? Leave no trace has been around for a long time. Certainly an ethic that I grew up with. And now, as demographics shift and new generations come into outdoor recreation, I'm curious, what you guys have seen as far as outdoor recreation patterns and how you've managed to evolve to sort of balance the tension between education on the one hand and inclusivity on the other, and trying to, reach more and more people as more and more people are outside.
Yeah, absolutely, David. And I think this is a burning issue that a lot of people are talking about. It's front and center for sure for Leave No Trace. How do we stay relevant, fresh, interesting, effective, inclusive for all? And the good news is we have 25 years of doing this work and a history in science. And that is what we look at first, the power of science and research. So our messaging is never static. It never has been. We really look at and examine, evaluate, reshape our education resources and training and messaging to understand what we're saying to people, how we're saying these things, and what makes a difference, what's effective and what's meaningful for people. And often that's meeting them where they are. And the baseline, it's created on the 7 principles, which haven't changed over time. They've been altered and tweaked a little, but really then we build out our messaging, our training programs, and our curriculum. And that is based in science. What's best for the land, first and foremost, and then how can people really play an active role. And I can't emphasize that enough. And you said, you've looked at your mission statement and it includes that word inspire. It's such a critical word when we're talking about asking people to do something and being inspired to do something for the land and for other visitors. And so that really captures the spirit, I believe, of Leave No Trace. It can be very personal and very empowering when we provide this knowledge and education to people. And it's not always, there's a spectrum. We often say it's a spectrum, and you can jump in as kind of an intro or entry level with just basic information, and all the way to more extreme outdoor adventurers, backcountry, people living outside for days at a time, and it becomes more technical. And any Leave No Trace is good Leave No Trace. So we first start to reshape, to answer that question, we really start with the power of science and research to understand really what we're saying, how we're saying it, what's most meaningful. Then we help use that information to shape our messaging and our programs. So that's how we reinforce it. And then finally, we offer training, all sorts of training, from online to in-person to short to long-term, to train the trainer formats for anyone interested in really learning more about the skills, the techniques, the ethic of Leave No Trace. In terms of education and inclusivity, I really believe they go hand in hand, and they must go hand in hand. We understand that there are absolutely barriers out there to access, socioeconomic, racial. There's the history, some of the things that you mentioned, David, earlier on, with the land itself and the people, Indigenous people. We've looked at that. We've been taking a hard look at that over the years, and our job is to really identify the barriers and see how we can integrate our programs and our education to help people overcome those barriers and feel welcome, and feel like they're not only welcome to the land, but a part of the solution to protecting the land. And again, that's really, again, in the spirit of Leave No Trace. And then something, Corey, you mentioned, and as absolutely paramount for the Leave No Trace program and organization, and that's partnerships. So we do have we've had a memorandum of understanding with the federal government, and that includes the U.S. Forest Service, National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Land Management, Army Corps. And that has been critical for the program to really get its messaging and its training out. And in addition to those partnerships, we have more recently been working with tourism organizations. So we have a number of states, and part of the beauty of this program and the effectiveness is we're trying to reach people before they get to their final destination. So we're providing information and how-tos and what to bring, that whole plan ahead and prepare stage, and how much we can influence that so people get to their final either experience or destination more prepared to Leave No Trace. We have stellar corporate partners, including REI, who's been a long-standing partner who helped fund programs and different efforts and keep our, again, research and science up to date. And then community partners, which include a whole slew of different nonprofits, NGOs, other groups that really broadcast our message out to as many people as possible. And that includes, so I know the focus, even at least in the title, is backcountry, but really it's reaching people in more of a front country or urban environment is critical to our work. So they get that information before, or at an introductory level, before they kind of gain more experience and more interest, frankly, in the outdoors and the protection of the outdoors.
Absolutely.
I'll pause there.
Yeah, that's great, Dana. I really appreciate it. And that tees us up well. I want to switch over to Haley to talk about Recreate Responsibly. One of the things that we grappled with internally at Winter Wildlands Alliance was trying to reach our core membership of, say, backcountry skiers and riders and snowshoers and people who are generally pretty savvy in the backcountry. How do we be more inclusive of new users? We're a demographic that traditionally likes to protect our stashes. But, you know, how do we welcome new people in parking areas, and how do we take on a mentorship role, and teach people about winter safety, and that message. And so we came up with Ski Kind, you know, as a way to just try to reach our core membership to you know, treat others on the trail at the trailhead with respect. But we realized pretty quickly how difficult it is to come up with messaging that reaches everybody, and that can be impactful, and people can hang on to, you know, this principle and remember it throughout the day, without having to go back to the website. But you know, Haley, if you could just talk to me about the general evolution of Recreate Responsibly, how it came about, what were the sort of bigger challenges. You know, I think it feeds right off of what Dana was saying.
Sure thing. Absolutely. It definitely feeds off of everything that both Corey and Dana were talking about. Just for a little background, the Recreate Responsibly Coalition is an active coalition of over 1,300 businesses, nonprofits, agencies, and other influential voices and outdoor recreation stakeholders who are really working together to help everybody experience the benefits of getting outside, and to do that safely and responsibly. Originally, Recreate Responsibly was born a couple months into the pandemic as a response to help people get out responsibly and safely without spreading COVID. As we've heard from everybody and we all have experienced, you know, getting outside was the one thing we could do, but which that also led to a whole host of problems that Corey illustrated beautifully. The crowding, the parking, and then you start to get into the tension between people. And then at the same time, our country was going through the racial awakening. And so we had a whole host of situations that were kind of coming to a head around the same time. So what the Recreate Responsibly Coalition did was we originally created a set of tools and resources that crafted common language that could be shared with the public. So we, David talked about the Ski Kind messaging. You know, we worked with Leave No Trace and several other stakeholders to help craft messaging to help, again, people get outside safely during COVID. So it was things like keep your distance, plan ahead, know before you go, wear a mask. It was just these general things that maybe we all think are common knowledge, but that weren't evident to the public. And so, you know, if you went to a local park around the country, or especially in California where I live, you could see that messaging reflected in the signs and the messaging that the staff were giving out to the folks. If you drive up to any national park, you would have seen the Recreate Responsibly messaging as soon as you're at the kiosk when you check in. So, you know, we spent a lot of time convening all these 1,300 partners. We created state chapters because it was such a movement. And again, including government agencies, businesses, nonprofits, everybody that has a stake in recreation. And so we created those toolkits and resources that supported messaging for all the coalition partners with the intention of being shared by the public. We worked on messaging that was related to COVID. We worked on winter guidelines as we were heading into the different seasons. I know David had a hand in crafting some of that. Recently, we had a wildfire edition. You know, we're facing this across the western states. So creating guidance to help people recreate without getting in the way of first responders and help them not start wildfires while they're camping. And so we created these toolkits and other resources, like we said, and then we shared them. So we put them, we packaged them up, we created graphics, we created social media suggestions that could be distributed by anybody, especially a lot of our nonprofit agency partners don't always have the resources to create those messaging and to create those assets. And so this coalition got together and just did all that work and the creative work and the brainstorming to create those messages. So then when the public sees them, they're getting the same message. So we're all aligned and telling the same story. Of course, there's also, you know, we built in, and just going back to the same topic that Dana and Corey were talking about, inclusivity. We also had, you know, added a bullet point in there. And I know Danica, who will speak in a minute, had a very large role in crafting that guideline, which was build an inclusive outdoors, was to really acknowledge the fact that, you know, we do have some situations where people don't feel welcome in the outdoors. And we were experiencing that very much last year. So it was an encouragement for everybody to respect each other and make the outdoors a comfortable place and welcoming place for everybody. Now that we're kind of emerging from the pandemic, we hoped we were, we're getting there. But other issues have arisen since then, right? Now we're not only left with some of the issues from the pandemic, but we're still very much feeling the impacts of increased recreation. And so the coalition still convenes. I can speak on behalf of California, where we convene monthly to hold thought leadership discussions to help generate conversation. And we also have begun to work more closely with destination management and marketing organizations like Visit California, like Discover Siskiyou. I mean, there's a whole host of them that we work with, but to help make sure that they're also helping share those messages before people get to their destination and, and start heading into the backcountry or even the front country and to do that responsibly. So it's been an incredible evolution. We're here to stay. Pandemic, whatever the issue, we have a very engaged network of over 1,300 entities who are, passionate and love the outdoors and want to help everybody get outside safely. So if you're interested in joining the coalition, it's open to everybody. You can join on the national level, find a state chapter if there's one, or start a state chapter if there isn't one in your state. I'd be happy to talk to anybody about that. But thanks so much for letting me share.
Yeah, thanks, Haley. And I can say that resource, that convening, has been really important and has been kind of eye-opening to me, and has been sort of a silver lining in this virtual world. And I'm going to pass it over to Danica to talk about this. But I think one of the things that's really been remarkable is to have these monthly meetings where you've got land managers and partners and stakeholders all coming together to develop messaging in a collaborative and democratic way, rather than, I think the traditional way in the old days was, Smokey created the messaging from above, and that was, what we all inherited and tried to follow. But, it's a much more dynamic time. And I think in general, I think that's been really positive and certainly feels like a community has been created. So Danica, just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm a child of the 80s, so Smokey the Bear and Lightning Bee were a lot of my instructional videos growing up. But, I think to Haley's point as well, and I'll try not to repeat her too much because, what she said really nailed it. And, David, your introduction around what we're all convening around with our public lands and the traumatic history that it does have for so many of us. And, whether you feel like you were a part of the victimization or your ancestry might be somewhere on the perpetrator line, it doesn't matter who is responsible for that trauma. It matters who is responsible for creating solutions together. And so I think that convening part was really what drew me to being more involved with Recreate Responsibly. Because if we time travel back to March 2020, right, I was in the mountains at the time, and there was about 2 to 4 weeks left in the ski season when we all had to shut down. And that was pretty devastating for the winter business at that time, because that's a lot of time where, retailers are still really rely on that income, and brands rely on retailers having a place to, help facilitate that income. And then as recreationists, looking at all of the convenience of resorts being shut down and recognizing that people that were already comfortable going to the resorts were pretty quickly switching over to backcountry. I mean, backcountry shops were being completely overwhelmed. And for a lane of recreation that is typically extremely cautious about who and how they provide equipment to as far as experience goes. So, and, sometimes very much, well, most of the time, very rightfully so. And sometimes there can be some perception that goes on there, a belief around who can and cannot. And I think all of those things were coming to a head in every different aspect of recreation around every single portion of our country and worldwide. This is not something that we were dealing with alone. We were really seeing a worldwide experiment go on how every single place was dealing with the impacts of what the pandemic was unpredictably bringing to our door. You know, anyone that thought they could predict what we look like today in March 2020, I don't buy it. Or you've got a level of ESP that I'd be very interested in. But I think what Recreate Responsibly did is they really initially created a tool that made it very helpful for people that, you know, my job as a marketer in the outdoor industry is to make outdoor recreation seem interesting. That was our job. And in March 2020, when everything was shutting down and everyone was being told to stay inside, don't go outside. And initially we actually were told, like, you weren't even supposed to go outside. I mean, in California, people, there was a high-speed chase of a paddleboarder in the ocean. Like, he was like trying to figure out how do I escape? I'm outside alone. There's no one within 6 feet of me, but that was how we were handling it because we didn't know what we were dealing with. And so everyone was doing the best they could and implementing what we thought were rules to protect people. And I use the term we very loosely because I use the term we for everyone. Everyone here on this planet is all we. So, you know, everyone was doing their best to do what they believed was right. And I think that there has been issues in our country did not arise on Memorial Day in 2020. The issues in our country have been here. The issues on the planet have been here. I don't need to go into all that history. You can do your own research, or you might already know more than I do. But I think that where our focus went, where I was impressed with Recreate Responsibly's focus going, because we were already using the toolkit, it was very helpful for us to help advise people in a way that said, still go outside. The health and wellness benefits of getting outside are undeniable. Go outside, but here's how you do it safely. And then also being able to convene with organizations that were working with the powers that be, levels of authority that we're implementing where you couldn't go in those things, and really working really hard to open up that understanding that, like, hey, we all need to get outside. Let's not try to keep people off their own neighborhood streets. Like, there was a lot of conflict going on around where people couldn't be. And that was a different level of trauma and terrifying from what we were already experiencing. And then just put extreme pressures around communities that were already being treated like that before we were all told to stay inside and, you know, not walk around our neighborhood. And then there's a lot of questions about, like, is this your neighborhood? And there was a lot of conflict coming to play for where people were. And, you know, I think in the outdoor industry, we have focused a lot on seeing the impacts of the overwhelm of the places where people are running to. And I think what the convening and Recreate Responsibly is doing well is not only bringing together stakeholders from the land management agencies and retailers and brands, people that earn their income off the outdoor industry, but has been doing a good job of attempting to create a bi-directional communication link with everyone, with all of us, where we are all outdoor recreationists. We are all responsible for what it looks like on the planet and where we are. And I think that means we also need to think about the impacts of the places that people are running from, and not recreating those impacts and barriers where we are now seeing population growth. You know, like we want to keep our wild spaces wild. And again, the history of how America has handled our wild spaces that were originally wild and what all went down there is something that we have to reconcile. And, you know, the fact that we're choosing to do it all at once wasn't anyone's decision. I mean, outdoor industry, snow sports industry, we have been begging for more participation forever. That's an annual conversation. How do we get more participation? And the results of the pandemic sent people sprinting to wherever they could get outside. And it's not just about recreation. It's about changing your lifestyle. People are looking to create a lifestyle around, how can I be in a place, in a space where I can easily get outside and be in nature? Maybe I don't want to go, you know, become an ultra runner. Maybe I just want to be able to walk to a park every day for my lunch break. And I think what we see in places where these historical problems have lived, the people and communities most affected by the changes in the environment that we've been experiencing, there's also being barriers created around being close to nature, because now there's this financial barrier of being close to nature, where so many of our public spaces are being close to public spaces. The cost to be close to them is unbelievable. Yeah, it's unbelievable privilege. And listen, I come from a privileged background. I am not without my privileges of being able to live in the mountains in Colorado and have access to places and spaces, and to see the experiences that I have of being treated like I don't belong when I have a space there that I know I'm allowed to be there. And then seeing people that look like me be treated like that, regardless of where they come from or what their experiences are. I mean, it's beyond unacceptable. And I think that we've been saying this for a long time. And now we're at a point in our country where there's enough people with platforms and voices that are collectively saying this together. And like Haley said, you know, we have been attempting to go through a racial reckoning in this country that's been a long time coming. And I think that Recreate Responsibly, that convening aspect, is helping to facilitate that in our outdoor industry. And then there's just a ton of things that we need to do. You know, like there's where the problems are, there's a seed for solution. There's an opportunity right now for innovation and creativity in the outdoor industry that I really think takes all of us coming together. And I think that, you know, there's people that need to reckon with how they may or may not have participated in that in the past, intentionally or unintentionally. And there's people that need to be welcomed in a way that might feel like you're going over and above, because there's been a conditioning in this country for decades and centuries that has told us that you are not welcome. Not only are you not welcome, but you might not be protected. You know, search and rescue in California, and I don't know where else, is almost completely volunteer based. But Haley and I were on the call this morning and listening to all of the efforts that go down in search and rescue that don't have a clear channel of funding. And then to have people say, like, to have the belief that, okay, me, as I look, as I am, can go out in a space. How do I know that someone's going to come for me? It takes a willingness and a want to rely on your fellow human. And can I rely on my fellow human is what so many people are asking. And it's challenging when the response comes back muddled. And so I think these clear channels where the response comes back clearly of like, yes, we are here for every single body that is on American soil is here to be protected. And I think that's where we're trying to move to.
Great. Thanks for all that, Danica. So we're coming up on 45 past the hour. So I want to open it up to some question and answer and some more open conversation. So I'm going to invite Melinda to jump on, and I'm going to invite the audience to, if you have any specific questions for any of our panelists, please drop those into the chat so Melinda can pass them our way. And while that's happening, I just want to ask one sort of broad, challenging question. I'll start with you, Corey. You know, is it working? Like, what are the metrics? How do we decide? You know, how do we measure our progress as we scramble to devise these partnerships and create messaging? How do we know if we're reaching people? Are we impacting the landscape in a positive way? Are we getting there? How much progress have we made, and how far do we have to go?
Yeah, great question. How do we measure success, right? How do we determine that we're doing or getting where we want to get? Not an easy answer. You know, to me, it does come down to that collaborative approach, you know, and I think in many ways, for a lot of what's been shared, I mean, as a country, I mean, we are having very inclusive, transparent conversations about just having that access and that use throughout the country. And I think, you know, locally, for me, it comes down to when we have other partners and local governments wanting to collaborate, wanting to come together and say, hey, we all collectively are identifying that there's this issue, and specifically, you know, carrying capacity and growth and use and access. And when we have a rural diverse group saying we want to come together, and granted, across the table, we don't always agree with each other. Like we're on opposite ends of the spectrum here, but we all collectively agree that there's kind of some common good here that we really need to be focusing on for our community. To me, that is a sign of some success. We having a real diverse group willing to take on some tough conversations, knowing that there's going to have to be some compromise and there's going to be that kind of collaborative approach to get to whatever that greater good is, I think is a sign of success. There's definitely more of that needs to happen. And I think there's still plenty of growth to occur. But I think that's at least one piece of how do you measure success it's having that inclusive, open, transparent conversation of a really diverse group that don't always agree with each other, but willing to come together and try to figure things out for the greater good. That's one piece for me. Thanks,
Corey. And I'm going to throw it to Dana. I see a comment here from Gail Small. Hi, Gail. It's been way too long. Thanks for being here. Comment being that, in the past, there used to be sort of, there'd be a uniformed ranger that would come up to your campfire and say, hey, do you know about, responsibility in building a fire, and you should have a bucket of water and a shovel, or you'd have an interpretive hike, where it's really face to face and you're really seeing what people are doing and not doing, and able to kind of work together in the landscape, and you can see the results right away. What do we do in this new landscape where there isn't that, where visitor centers are closed, where there isn't that face-to-face interaction at the campgrounds, where there aren't rangers on the ground? Broad comment, question. Dana, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I think that the face-to-face has been on the decline. This is not just a COVID issue, but we know that the federal government budgets have been on the decline pretty much forever, as far as I can understand. Corey, you might chime in there, but there's never enough money to have, boots on the ground, or people, rangers, and even volunteers out there talking with people. And that is a very effective way to reach people with solid education. And so the question is, well, what do we do about that then, especially during these weird COVID times? And I think we do partially rely on coalitions like Recreate Responsibly, rely on different partner groups and reaching new and diverse partner groups who haven't traditionally been in the outdoors. We have some really interesting new partnerships that we've been forming. One is called Black Folks Camp 2, and we have a unity blaze that is basically a symbol of unity in the outdoors. We have a new partnership with the group IANTA, American Indian Alaskan Native Tourism Association. And it's kind of bringing Leave No Trace to different groups and looking at it with a different lens. So that doesn't answer the question of how are we on public lands reaching people, but again, it's partially reaching people before they get to their actual trailhead or whatever, their park or their final destination. In terms of really looking at success, and that's always a tricky question, and it's something that we're constantly looking at. And there's a number of things that we measure. Not only how many people are we reaching, where are we reaching them, what are the new partner groups that we're working with and reaching, but how successful are we with our education initiatives? And that means, is there less trash? Is wildlife healthier or, maintained at least? Is the health and integrity of wildlife being maintained? And again, this is where science is so key to us. I'll just throw out one very specific example that we did a 3-year study in 3 national parks to look at waste. And the desire was that these parks went to zero landfill. And so it was it's a lofty goal, it's ongoing, but we did a lot of message testing on receptacles to see what people responded to and what the best Leave No Trace messaging was that we could use. And what we found throughout this process and with this research is that we can message in a way that people appropriately recycle, compost, trash their trash. And it did make a difference in those parks. So it's really a testing of the message, going back to what are we asking people to do? What information, knowledge, education are we providing for them and inspiring them with? in order for us all to collectively make a difference? And how can we continually look at those success measures? So there's lots of different things. For me, those are the most meaningful on the ground. How are we really making a difference? But they also at the same time can be the most challenging. Right. To the woman who mentioned that she's not seeing that information, maybe as available, I reach out to us. We have so many offerings that we're still a small nonprofit based here in Boulder, Colorado, although we have messaging and programs in every state and now in 90 different countries. We're still a very, I like to say, small but mighty group trying to get the message out. And so if you are feeling like, you can volunteer and help and we can help you also, but reach out to us and we'll see what we can come up with.
Thanks for that, Dana. And also on that topic, we'll be having a really good, robust discussion this afternoon at 2 p.m. Mountain, 1 p.m. Pacific, all about volunteer trail host and snow ranger programs. That's a whole nother component of this. Melinda, we've got about 10 minutes left or 9 minutes left. Are there questions that are coming through?
Yeah, we've got another one from Gail. She asked if, do you think a national recreation area is managed in a way that can address some of these problems better than general national forests?
It's a tough
It's a tough one.
for this panel. Anybody want to take that one? Different management scenarios. That's one of the tricky things for visitors, who maybe don't necessarily know, is this Park Service? Is this Forest Service? Which, Department of Agriculture or Interior or National Recreation Area, National Scenic Trail? What are all those rules? I think that's one of the things we've grappled with at Recreate Responsibly, is being able to, just say, hey, no matter where you are, these are the general rules.
And I would chime in very briefly that, and no offense to any land managers, the public generally doesn't care. And a lot of times they don't know. They don't know what lands they're on, and they don't really care that much, as long as they have access and feel included and can get out and enjoy an experience. So that's first and foremost. But to have a consistent message is critical. And that is where we fall back on even the phrase "leave no trace." People recognize it. And again, they don't necessarily know exactly what they need to do all the time. I mean, we know that for a fact because we wouldn't be having this conversation, but at least they recognize the phrase "leave no trace" and understand the spirit of "leave no trace." Oh, that means I'm here and I can help care for this place. And again, the more information that we can then have available, the better. But I think that consistency of messaging is very critical.
Yeah. What else, Melinda?
Yeah, we've got one from Austin that says, how might major gear manufacturers and retailers help educate or train those who purchase gear?
I'm going to steal this from here first because I should give REI some credit here for sure. I think a term that has really resonated with me that has come up over many, many convening conversations, primarily with Recreate Responsibly, but the expert handoff. I think none of us individually should be taking responsibility or accountability for the education of anything on any single thing. I say we have to look to the resources that exist, develop a relationship with them, develop communication with them, whether it's your local fire services, local search and rescue, a local backcountry outfit, whatever it is, develop a relationship with people and organizations that can take on that expertise, and do the expert handoff. I think a lot of times in our industry, we try to take that on ourselves. I think some people do that really well. I think the ones that do it the best are ones that continue to learn and evolve. I think REI is a great example of that. Like they have so much programming that is really, really welcoming to beginners because they do it in a way that helps people see a community that they can learn with, of like, ooh, I'd feel safe around this group of people, or I'd feel safe in this scenario. And so allow you to kind of dip your toes in ways that can be more accessible. I don't know if you're still doing it, Haley, but there used to be almost every REI location you could go and there was like, oh, would you like to join this class today and learn a little bit about something, So I think just helping to amplify where those places exist, where you can give that expert handoff. We make gear that is meant to help you enjoy the outdoors and stay out longer. But I'm not going to be able to tell you perfectly all of the other list of gear that you might need specific to your adventure. And I think retail shops have a different access point than brands do. I think someone walking in your door, they're interested, what they're in for. And I think the way to create that conversation in a welcoming and forward moving way is to get to do the same level of getting to know them and what they're interested in as you are willing to provide information. And then you can kind of get a better feel for like, okay, who's coming in my area? What are the best things that I can supply? What are those expert handoff pieces that I need to have available based on the people that are coming in my door?
Thanks, Danica. Haley, I got to give you 30 seconds on that. All of retailers,
Thanks, Danica. It's always great when other folks are talking about REI. That's when I can measure success. So thank you. But just to echo what she said, the expert handoff, sometimes REI is the expert on that thing. So we're happy to provide information, resources, content, in-person advice, virtual events. Danica, you mentioned we have workshops. We certainly REI, we've gone virtual now. So you can get a lot of that great advice there. But I do believe it is a responsibility of those who are selling the gear, especially some of that backcountry gear, where I'm sure for folks on this conference is most familiar. But it is our responsibility as retailers, as gear manufacturers, to help folks understand where the resources are that they should be and could be looking into. What are the classes they could be taking when they're buying that beacon, shovel, and probe, right? What about a bike? What about bike safety? So it behooves us when we have all these new users coming into the outdoor space to help them do it safely and to do it responsibly. And so I believe that's a shared responsibility. And then you layer in some of the resources from folks like, the organizations like Leave No Trace, like Recreate Responsibly. There's a whole host of tools and resources at any manufacturer or retailer's disposal that could help the public be educated and to really know before they're getting into something. And so I believe that's our responsibility to do that.
Thanks, Haley. 3 more minutes, Melinda. What else?
Yeah, we've got, I would say about 2 more questions, which might be the perfect amount of time. We've got 2 that are actually similar, so I combine them into one. Both Jorah and Jim asked the question of, are there any examples of outdoor gear taxes, perhaps voluntary, that can fund education and agency partnerships? Jim's was more specific to, can there be a uniform way nationally for human-powered outdoor recreationalists to support funding for public lands, access improvements, easements, ranger funding? And he also suggested a voluntary tax, something industry could spearhead. So I think that's a great question. Great
question. Huge can of worms. I know we're OSV and motorized folks pay taxes. We pay taxes on fuel that help to manage certain parts of outdoor recreation. But I think people always question, where do we get the funds for the agencies to do what they're doing or for volunteers? Haley, you got any answer to that or any thoughts on that?
No, sorry, that falls a little bit out of my expertise. So I can't answer that question. Thank you.
Danica? We have a glove tax that supports winter recreation.
I think the reason I resist that one a little bit is because we already have a challenge of outdoor equipment being a challenge to afford. And I think there's so many amazing nonprofits and NGOs that do this work that it would be better to funnel the money through those and also help create channels for money coming through from different arenas. I think there's being too much put on brands, price of goods, price of sponsorships. That's just going to keep making those equipment prices go up. It's really, really challenging to keep gear affordable with all the costs of not only making the gear, but doing the business of like even letting you know that we exist and here's the gear we make. There's so much financial burden that already goes into that we try so hard not to pass on to consumers, that I think if you do have any level of excess or privilege that I'm really, really hesitant to add it on as any level of tax, or, I mean, if you're willing to donate, like there's a lot of great organizations.
Yep, and it's a good plug for tomorrow at this time, 10 a.m. Mountain, 9 a.m. Pacific. We're going to have a in-depth conversation about how we fund the agencies and what are the different channels for trying to improve that funding. And that's definitely a conversation that's on a lot of people's minds right now, especially with infrastructure packages trying to work their way through Congress and lots of money potentially flowing in certain directions. Melinda, anything else for last 30 seconds?
Yeah, we've got a question from Tom. Do you think there is an opportunity for an Airbnb experience styled guided outdoor recreation activity by validated and verified leaders that are teaching the values of responsible recreation to new recreators? Tom's idea is that it solves the entry-level accessibility and ensures they're learning good values from the outset. Tom wanted our thoughts.
Good. I mean, it's kind of along the same lines as the retailer interface. We've got Hip Camp, right, Haley? There are lots of people starting to get into that business. Anybody want to speak to that?
We definitely haven't rolled out anything yet, but definitely played around with the idea of our traveling teams. So we have 4 teams, 8 educators out on the road, doing all sorts of outreach and training all over the country. And we've definitely played around with the idea of them offering guided courses or tours that offer, tours that are half tour, half education through Airbnb. We haven't rolled anything out. But the other thing that's kind of along those lines is in terms of getting education into people's hands is we do work with the federal government and state and local. And this just is such a model that should work and could work. And that is when people apply for permits. So it's limited, but when they need a permit or even a reservation, they get Leave No Trace information as part of that application, or they're required to watch a video. So this is happening in Glacier National Park. So especially going into backcountry, that it's a captive audience. It's something that is a requirement to obtain the permit. And so at least we know they're getting some sort of Leave No Trace education before they head out there. Again, it's that isn't widespread yet, but it is somewhat of a format that could work.
Great, thanks, Dana. Lots of creativity and innovation happening. It's exciting. So I'm going to have to cut it off. We're 2 minutes past the hour. I want to respect everyone's time, but thank you all of the panelists for joining us. Thanks for sharing your expertise and experience, taking the time, and thanks to all of our audience. I think we were up to 67 people at some point. Thank you so much for being here. Really important conversations, and we'll be at it for the next couple of days. So please join us along the way, and you'll receive a follow-up email with a survey and a link to the recorded session. Please feel free to share that and definitely fill out the survey so that we can continue to do better as we move forward in our biennial Grassroots Advocacy Conference. Thanks again.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.